Last year, I attended the 38th AUSIT National Conference. There were some very interesting presentations, caught up with some old friends, met some new people. There were the usual themes, the government promising to invest in the industry, but a big topic was NAATI's plan to introduce an LSP endorsement model. Now, LSP stands for Language Services Provider, what we still call agencies. LSPs are the middlemen between all the freelance interpreters and translators on the one hand, and the market on the other. The market in Australia consists mostly of government contracts, which are put out to tender annually. Now, in NAATI's model, to participate in these tenders and compete for government work, an agency would first have to ask NAATI to endorse them. And to be endorsed, they will have to meet several requirements set by NAATI. The stated objectives of the endorsement model are to improve organisational accountability and service consistency. These goals are as noble and impressive as they are vague. But a closer reading reveals that they are basically about directing work to NAATI credential holders and then reporting that you have done this and explaining why if you haven't. And many LSPs have been built up over the years without having to do any of this. So this would represent a sudden increase in their administrative burden and a major shift in the regulatory environment. Not NAATI's problem though. There seems to be no consideration about how this might affect the viability of these private businesses. Now, I attended a presentation by NAATI reporting on recent progress. Unfortunately, the Q&A finished just as I was reaching for the microphone, so I thought I'd put my question in this video. My question to NAATI is, if you are so confident that this endorsement model will mean nothing but improvement, if you boast sufficient operational acumen that you could tell an LSP to use one practitioner over another for a particular job, then my question to you, NAATI, is why don't you really invest in the industry? Start your own LSP. You apparently have all the best data, the best advice and the best ideas to make all these things work. You are so confident that these ideas will work that you are poised to impose them on others at no risk whatsoever to yourselves. Surely there's no way you would risk making business more difficult for those who actually create and distribute the wealth to practitioners and alleviate cold inequality. Is there? LSP owners whose fortunes until now have been entirely dependent on their judgment, on the decisions they make and policies they've developed. Decisions and policies that have a real-world track record of delivering quality and staff and client satisfaction. You wouldn't be trying to replace those policies and decisions and judgments with things that you are privately afraid might not work, would you? Surely not. If none of that is a potential outcome of this model, then start your own agency, NAATI. Recruit, advertise, start selling translation and interpreting services to the world. All the while following the requirements you're about to impose on others. Show us how it would work. You wouldn't need to endorse or disendorse this agency or that LSP. You could lead by example. Skeptical people would simply sit back in unrestrained forehead-slapping admiration, observing with slack-jawed and contrite amazement your rapid and inevitable success. A respectful NAATI would reach new heights as the entire industry then paid you the highest compliment of all, imitation. It wasn't really a question, it was a comment in a cloak of heavy sarcasm. Now, in case that got past you, let me be more direct. Shut the fuck up about how other people should run their businesses. You know nothing about business. You barely understand translation and interpreting. And that's not some random gratuitous insult. It's a logical consequence of who you are. You sell tests. We all bought one years ago and then ventured where you fear to tread, the real world. To survive and prosper, we discovered transaction by transaction the galactic complexity of language and translation as a business. If we're still here now, it's because of the practice we developed to deal with that complexity, and none of it was ever, better pass another NAATI test. We've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Our response to the actual challenge of supplying translation and interpreting services of sufficient quality while keeping everyone happy has required flexible and innovative and creative solutions, none of which are remotely contemplated in the NAATI test. That's because these solutions aren't conveniently bundled up in individual humans. NAATI and their roadies, the universities and RTOs, are only concerned with the attributes of individual candidates and students because that's their revenue stream. NAATI do not engage with the market. They have therefore never been exposed to the real-life problem of how to sustain a business model that solves client problems, keeps your workers happy, and yields a profit sufficiently greater than the cost of all that trouble to feed your family, pay the bills, and reassure ourselves that we made the right choice of career. With all of it dependent on the quality of the sentences we deliver as finished translations, and not on the credentials of the people who might have been involved in their production. NAATI is an organisation of people without the inclination or responsibility or even ability to attempt those things. They sell tests and they enjoy a monopoly, so they've never received any painful market feedback that might have forced them in a commercially realistic time frame to improve their product. It took them 34 years to even try to fix the problems in the tests that were apparent to everyone in the early 90s. NAATI suffers from main character syndrome. They keep parachuting themselves into the centre of public discourse on translation and interpreting as though they were some ultimate font of professional wisdom. They're like your grade 1 teacher still ringing you up in middle age to tell you how to raise your kids. NAATI had one job and it ended years ago. And if there are people still around making a go of translation and interpreting, it's NAATI who should be studying them, not presuming to know better. I suspect the LSP owners, whose businesses depend critically on government work, unlike mine, are staring like terrified deer at the headlights of this fast approaching change in their business environment, forced to put on the dunce's cap with stakeholder written on it and sit around NAATI's table agreeing that this is a great idea that they never had. One of my colleagues observed that this looks like NAATI and the government simply stitching up a system to ensure that all and any failures, complaints and grievances land squarely at the feet of the agencies and bypass NAATI altogether, as though, well, we defined what a good LSP is. If something's wrong, it must be their fault. Now, I'm happy to go on the record and predict that if the LSP model is ever introduced, that it will result in perverse outcomes. Quality, access, and worker satisfaction will not increase, they will decrease. And I'm happy to be proved wrong. And NAATI are in the perfect position to prove me wrong by measuring all these indicators before the introduction of the model and then afterwards at yearly intervals and making all that data available to the public so that everyone can see the indisputable improvement. Surely, NAATI, you're that confident.